Welcome to the Hockey Writers Maple Leafs Lounge, a weekly show from our Toronto Maple Leafs writing crew, bringing you the latest news, rumors, trades, player grades, prospects, and much more. From training camp to the playoffs, from draft day to the trade deadline, our team covers everything that happens with the blue and white. Come on in and pull up a chair. Welcome to the Maple Leafs Lounge.
Hello and welcome back to the Maple Leafs Lounge. I am your host, Peter Baracchini. As always, I am joined by my colleague over at the Hockey Writers, Alex Hobson. Alex, let's just pull the Band-Aid off the wound right now. We got a lot to talk about. Before we dive in, I got to ask, I know your reaction because we were doing the game together. How are you doing despite the loss right now that you've had time for everything to sink in?
I'm fine. I've never been better. Let's get into this.
Perfect. Quick, easy, just like that. Let's get right into it.
No sugarcoating.
Exactly. If you aren't aware, the Maple Leafs lost their second round series to the Florida Panthers 4-1 after a 3-2 overtime victory on a goal by Nick Cousins, aka former Sioux Greyhound. I still don't understand why he's not with the Leafs, but just Alex, just from your overall impression with this series, like it seemed like it was a complete 180 from what we saw with Tampa Bay. Even though the Maple Leafs were outplayed, they found that, drive, that motivation to kick it up a notch and get into the extra gear. You just didn't see that in this one. So final thoughts on the series and what are you feeling right now? Even though I asked you previously at the top of the show.
Well, it's kind of embarrassing for me to say this, but because I grew up a Leafs fan, understand that I've been watching this team since 2005. So the year after that they last won a round before this year. So as complacent of a take as this is going to be, personally, I didn't really lose that much sleep over it because this year it was just like, hey, thanks for hurting me a little less because I'm used to the first round losses. And I know that sounds super pathetic. I don't care. Anyways, so that's how I'm feeling overall. That being said, as someone who covers the sport and as someone who writes about this team, I think that this has to be some semblance of a last straw. If you watch the press conferences today, I know we're going to get to that in detail a little more later, but Keefe and Dubas both sounded pretty shaken up. Like it did not have the confidence and it did not have the just the vibe of previous blocker cleanout interviews. So I wouldn't be shocked to see some changes happen this summer. And, I don't necessarily think that there's any big like trade or any big move that they could do that could fix this team's problems instantly. But and not to spoil this part for later, but Dubas did say today that if he sticks around and if he keeps his job as GM, then he's not leaving anything off the table, which is a very broad statement and obviously doesn't mean he's going to be trading a big piece. But I'm just at the point where, I was wrong about the fact that I thought that when they first won around after all that time, I really thought they were going to catch fire and ride that momentum. And obviously Florida had some momentum too, but even then I still definitely thought that series was going 7. I didn't think they were going to lay 3 eggs in a row at the start. Like you said, I thought we were past that, but apparently not. So personally, I don't think there's any one change that I would make specifically. I'd be open to anything, just like I'm sure Dubas would be open to anything this summer because it's clear that something's not working. So,
yeah, it seemed like they were kind of taken aback. Like they were kind of deer in the headlights from game 1. And even Keefe said that the series was lost in the first 3 games because, they were shaky and tentative in game 1. Game 2, they jumped out into that 2-0 lead, which is what they wanted to do. And then costly mistakes caught up to them and they lost the lead. In game 2, same thing happened in game 3. Early 1-0 lead, mistakes crucial in game 3. They found their way in game 4 in kind of like a must win, but then again, the star players didn't show up. And then in game 5, it was just back to the old habits. And it seems like they just really haven't quite learned their lesson. And you brought up a good point about there isn't one big thing that could fix this team right away, even if it's a massive move. This is all like mentally for them. This is all in their minds. It's like they can't get over that hump. It seems like they can't rise above to the occasion when this situation is growing dire. And we even see every other team's top players when the going gets tough, star players shine. I mean, whether it's Sebastian Aho in Carolina, whether it's, I'm going to throw in Joe Pavelski in there because he's still playing like he's, young 20-year-old star right now in Dallas. Even the Kraken, their star players are showing up. The Devils with Jack Hughes and Nico Hischier and everybody else. It seemed like Matthews and Marner, and again, we're going to get to all that a little bit later on about their future, but it just seemed like they didn't quite have that. And it was a little bit disappointing that they still haven't quite figured it out, that kind of play, that kind of mentality is not going to cut it out, especially in the playoffs. And Matthew Tkachuk had a great review of them. They have the skill, but that individual skill doesn't mean anything in the playoffs when you have to win as a team and the intensity ramps up. Mm-hmm. So I'm still happy that they won a series, but I'm disappointed that they didn't carry that kind of like the way Florida did after the Boston series.
Yeah. And again, we keep alluding to the topics we're going to be talking about in like 10 minutes, but obviously if you were paying attention to social media at all today, you saw that Auston Matthews says that he wants an extension and he wants it to be done soon, mm-hmm. which was, the first time we've really heard him comment on that. And in a sense that he, outside of your generic hockey player, like, oh, I'm just going to let my agent deal with that after the season or something like that. Like, this is the first time we've heard him say that he wants to return to Toronto. So I think in that sense, you still have to, your window is going to extend. If you can bring Auston Matthews back, then your window extends by another however many years he comes back for. And people might say, well, you need to shake up the core, you need to do something. And while true, Auston Matthews, I think right then and there, he's somebody that even though maybe he hasn't been as consistent in game sevens and in elimination games as you'd like him to be, he's also by far one of the best players this team has had in a long time. So if you can bring him back, you can still build teams around him that are good enough to make runs like this. And I still think that mentality and that drive to win can be implemented eventually. I just think that with the current mix of players they have, like you said, the current mix of players and just the layout of their team as it stands right now, I think that it needs some sort of a change. And I don't think Matthews is part of that change as much as he went quiet. I do think that he's the cornerstone guy for this franchise, and you need to keep building good teams around him, and eventually the playoff performances will come.
Absolutely. We are going to get to all that more in depth later on. But first, let's talk about the end of season presser that happened today with all the players. We're going to get to the players soon, but let's talk about the two main figures in terms of the Maple Leafs, the bench boss and the general manager in Kyle Dubas. Obviously, it seemed like two different types of scenarios could play out. Obviously, Sheldon Keefe, there's the talk about, if there's a shakeup, maybe you try and go to the bench boss and maybe trying to bring in a different voice, but there really isn't quite a better fit out there than at the moment. And then there's Kyle Dubas right now, it seems like he may stick around, but his future is in doubt considering, if he doesn't want to go anywhere else, but then again, he wants to talk it over with his family because the season did take a toll on him. What was I want to first get your reaction quickly on Dubas's comments about, putting his family first and prioritizing everything else before he makes his commitment and willingness to stay with Toronto, and then get over to Keefe and the possibility of him returning.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously Kyle Dubas's family is a big part of things. Like, if you're a fan, you can't really comment on things like that, because if he feels that his family's not going to be comfortable in Toronto for whatever reason, then that's obviously something that he has to put first before the minds of the fans of the team that he managed. That being said, I don't want to speculate on why it wouldn't have been, why it took a toll on his family. But if part of it had to do with the fact that, maybe they were concerned about his job security and what the future held. I mean, I saw a tweet today saying that on the 32 Thoughts podcast with Elliot Friedman, He said that Dubas or ownership rather had committed to keeping Kyle Dubas after Tampa Bay
won the series. Yeah.
So hopefully that sense of security would improve the situation. And as long as Dubas wants to come back, it sounds like it sounds like they're going to reunite, because between Dubas saying that he's not going to work anywhere else, it's either going to be, with the Leafs or not at all. I mean, I just that just strikes me as, and when you combine that with the fact that what Friedman said on 32 Thoughts today, and I will note that obviously Friedman has a way of speculating just kind of into space, but this was not like one of those, I have a hunch or I feel kind of things. Like he said pretty outright that they had committed to keeping Dubas after the Tampa series. So I think as long as both parties are happy and there's some security for him and his family in there, I absolutely think that they should keep him. And we'll get into this a little more, but I just think that if you're gonna rank the list of players to blame for the way that this season went, Dubas falls dead last on that list. And I really don't think that this team gets better if they hire a different GM, especially with what's available right now.
And especially with the moves that he made too, like he wasn't afraid of going all in at the deadline to try and prove that, he's not afraid of making these types of moves, which is why many thought that, because of that trade deadline, he should have earned that contract extension then. But then again, the job does take a toll on the individual and even the family and everything like that. And he's got to reevaluate everything. And I totally understand that. And even if he didn't, it seems like kind of the same situation as Keefe with the head coaching job. Who is a reliable person that could come in and fill the shoes that Dubas had on this team? It is very interesting to see, because it doesn't seem like there was a viable option. Maybe you could try and talk to other teams. Maybe you promote Brandon Pridham to a general manager role. And again, we're going to get to that, something a little bit more about Pridham later on. But this is a guy that works the salary cap. He knows the math. He knows everything. He knows the numbers to try and fit everything together. And if he has a good scouting team with him, that would work in his favor to try and build a competitive team. And like you said, same thing with Keefe. As much as I think maybe they do need a fresh voice, again, who are you going to look to? As much as I like Bruce Boudreau as a possible fit, again, we know kind of his track record in terms of not much playoff success, but great regular season success. Is that going to be a huge improvement? Everyone is saying, get Gerard Gallant. And considering what he did in New York, and again, same thing as Boudreau, is it a real improvement over what we have? And I think if you get a more competitive team, I think that has something that Keefe can work with in regards to the assets that he has on the ice, and he's not line juggling every single time.
Yeah. And I think the other thing about firing Keefe that sort of makes things difficult is, in my opinion, that sends the wrong message to the core group of players. Because Morgan Riley said it best today. And as much as Riley did not have to say this because he was the best player on the ice, I think, throughout the entire series, but he said in the end, Dubas gave them every opportunity that he could. And, he didn't really comment on Keefe that much, but what he did say at the end was, in the end, the players are the ones that are on the ice. Right. And this has now been 7 years under two coaches where the core group of players on this team couldn't win more than 5 games in the playoffs. And, I know that the big monkey off the back this year was getting out of the first round, and they did do that to their credit, but they did it to win 2 more games. So, it's a lot easier for people to forget about that. So, I'm not exactly vouching that the Leafs should shake up their core and make a big trade like that. Like I said, I don't care. I think that whatever happens this offseason. I think that there's not too many other bullets that you can fire in terms of fixing what's wrong with this team, especially in the postseason. So I mean, as much as I don't really think that Keefe has done a job that warrants him safe forever and potentially not even through this summer, I also just think that sends the wrong message to your core players.
Yeah, and that's the thing too. We've heard Dubas say that he's instilled that faith in the core previously, but now there was a different tone this time around where, everything, he basically said that nothing is off the table when it comes to his team this season, whether that is moving a big piece. Where I obviously you're not going to move Matthews. John Tavares says that he wanted to say, so it's either coming down to Mitch Marner or William Nylander as a possible big shakeup. And I'm curious to get your thoughts too. Where would you stand on a possible Mitch Marner or William Nylander move? Because you have pros and cons for each, where Marner's dominant in the regular season. He's a Selke nominee. And then you have William Nylander that is rising to the occasion and basically playing hero in regards to the top players in Matthews and Marner not playing at their best. What do you think of that as opposed to a massive shakeup happening? Even though I know where you stand on this, but if it does come down to that, who is the odd man out?
Personally, for me, it would probably be Marner. And I just say that because it's a lot easier to shake him when the going gets tough than it is to shake Nylander from what I've seen. Mm-hmm. And, it in the end, it really comes down to his contract more than anything else, because I really think that Nylander, like you said, he's a guy that's consistently risen to the occasion in the playoffs. He's had his dry spells here and there, but his dry spells have come at a time when other players are succeeding. So it hasn't really affected the team all that much. But I find that in these games where the going gets tough and in these games where the Leafs need the most out of their stars, Keefe routinely gives Matthews and Marner every single opportunity that he can give them to just take the game on their shoulders and carry their teams to victory. And it's not too often that I've seen Marner do that. I know that he was producing points at a ridiculous pace in these playoffs, but in the elimination games and in the games like the ones in that Florida series, especially in the Florida series, he didn't have a single goal in those 5 games. Sorry, he had the 1 goal in those 5 games. But I just think that for the amount of times that we've had to have this conversation, I'd be more inclined to trade the guy making 10.6 million who has this issue rather than the guy making 6.9 million, although he's due for a raise. The guy making 6.9 million who we don't have to have this conversation about. And that's really what it comes down to for me, is just showing up in these big games. And Nylander, he's looked great alongside Matthews when he's played there. He can make things work when he's playing alongside Tavares. He's been more consistent, and provided he doesn't get Marner's money on his next contract, as long as it's somewhere below that, I think he's probably a better option to keep.
Yeah. And Dubas alluded to that Matthew Tkachuk trade from the Florida Panthers with the Florida Panthers and Calgary Flames as a big deal that could try and shake up his roster. And I do agree that Marner might be the best possible target or casualty in all this, is as a result of his play in the playoffs. And even this series against Florida, it seemed like he balked at every opportunity to try and showcase his talents. And he was very slow on the breakouts, and he's never slow on the breakouts. He's always flying. He's been making questionable decisions and high danger plays that end up broken within his own zone, leading to turnovers and everything like that. And that's not Mitch Marner. You know it. I know that. And the way that Nylander has consistently risen in those big moments shows that he's able to overcome that, and Marner can't. And that is a big problem. And, we all talk that Nylander's contract is most likely going to be the casualty because it is 6.9. It's very cheap for other teams, and you're getting that kind of production for another year. But then again, if you move on from Marner, you could use some of that cap space to try and sign him at 9, maybe 10 million, because he, again, back-to-back 80-point seasons. And I believe he hit 40 goals a season. He is due for a big pay raise, whether that's with Toronto or elsewhere, who knows? But I do think that maybe both players have merits to staying and both players have merits to moving. But if the Maple Leafs are dead serious about finding playoff success, Nylander's come up clutch more so than Marner. And I would tend to agree with you in that regard as well.
Yeah, I think just the bottom line is there has to be a change. And you hope that Nylander's not the guy. And we talk about how much of a difficult decision it's going to be. That's why it's Dubas's job and not ours. So I'm just going to sit back and watch it play out. And then when change inevitably comes, if it does, then we'll talk about it then.
Absolutely. And as we get set for the second half of our show, Here's a quick word from the hockey writers.
Interested in writing for the Hockey Writers? If you have experience writing about hockey, are passionate about the sport, and are looking to take your writing to the next level, the Hockey Writers could be the place for you. Here at THW, you will have the opportunity to hone your craft at one of the world's largest and most respected hockey publishers. You will have control over what you write, be able to seek out media credentials, and be supported by a large network of writers and editors. Plus, you'll get paid for doing it. If you're interested and want to know more about team openings and requirements, please visit the Write for THW page on the Hockey Writers website. A link to that page is also listed in the description.
And we are back. As we left off the first half of our show about changes needing to come, let's talk about, we're still talking about the press conference that happened early yesterday. And, the big thing is the core wants to remain intact. We've heard it from Nylander. He said he doesn't want to be anywhere else. We talked about Matthews wanting his extension done before the season, which means that he does have intent on wanting to stay and get things done here. Contrary to other people saying that he's going to, up and bolt for Arizona or elsewhere because of another failed playoff attempt. But it seems like the players are taking initiative that maybe they want to try and do this again without the vote of confidence from management and from the head coach. What do you think of that, Alex, in regards to their comments and their willingness to stay? And I'm even going to throw in Morgan Riley because he's been through a lot and he had a hell of a postseason this year.
Yeah. You know what? On one hand, I really respect the players for coming out and saying that because, and you know what? I know that's a generic thing to say at the end of the season, but for someone like Matthews specifically, for him to come out and say, this is where I want to be, and I want to get this extension done, hopefully before the season starts. I mean, that right there, just that makes you feel good as a fan to know that your star player genuinely does care about being there. Now, that being said, as much as I respect all the guys for wanting to come back and wanting to write things after all these years, I don't know if they can really. I don't know if the fan base can handle another playoff round loss where these guys are speaking to the media, talking about learning lessons and, making bad decisions and, having learning experiences and stuff like that. And, there's a lot of belief in this group, like all the cliche quotes that you've heard from this team in the past. I'm just going to say past 4 years because I think that's when the stakes have been the highest.
Since Columbus. Yeah.
Yeah. Since Columbus, pretty much. So I don't know how many more times the fans can handle hearing those quotes again. And so, I mean, like I said, I know that this is a cliche and not a good answer at all, but I really don't have an opinion as to what happens this year. Like I said, if they come back, fingers crossed, hopefully they can figure it out. But it is good to see at least the fact that they're dialed in and they do want to come back. But at the same time, can the fans handle it?
Yeah, and that's huge too. And then immediately after, days after, even before this press conference, everyone is saying now the shift focus is to Auston Matthews and his contract. And obviously that is the big thing, but you have to beg the question is what's his motivation? Where's his mind at? And clearly today his mind is dead set on this team. But then again, if he's able to get it done and if, at some point they're going to probably have to value winning over earning a little bit more money at this point. Is he willing to take maybe a shade off of what his original contract was, or is he going to get paid even more? Considering he's an MVP, it's hard not to consider that because he is one of the top players in this league. And I again, the fact that he said that, the fact that, William Nylander said, I don't want to be anywhere else, instead of I want to be here. And I think Rachel Dory had a really great breakdown of that, saying, there's a difference between the two statements. The former of I don't want to be anywhere else shows that he wants to stay committed to this team as well. So you're getting that from their star players, which is great. But now, like you said, it's time for the empty promises and the excuses, and it's time to buckle down and play your best when it matters most. And then none of these cue plays, none of these passes between the feet instead of making the easy outlet pass or dump and chase kind of play. They got to be better with that. And that's the main thing that stands out. Before I also want to get your thought on this too. And I think this is one thing that stood out for me was the Maple Leafs and Michael Bunting, per David Alter of the Hockey News, said Bunting said that they didn't have any contract talks with the Maple Leafs during the season. Now, we know that isn't, out of the norm or anything like that, because players want to focus on the season before heading to, free agency or whatever like that. But does that seem like an indicator that Bunting may want to test the market? And if so, is that a good thing or a bad thing if the Maple Leafs don't re-sign Bunting?
Sorry. I don't know. That's really hard to say, because I think that if you're Michael Bunting, you would be harming yourself by not at least testing the market and just seeing what other kind of offers are out there, because the way that season ended, and I know that a lot of it was just based on heat of the moment stuff, and I know it doesn't define his entire tenure here, but for every story about for every great story about, him being a Scarborough native and being a Leafs fan and growing up in Toronto and wanting to play for his hometown team and stuff, for every story like that, you can't ignore what happened in the playoffs, and with everything about him getting suspended and then Keefe not putting him in the lineup right away again, rather. The issues that he had with officials all year. If I'm Dubas, I'm asking myself if I want to commit to that long term, because for as much as you can tell that he wants to be in Toronto, and as much as he has been a pretty overall solid contributor since he's been with the team, is it something that you want to have to potentially deal with the fallbacks of for a prolonged period of time? So I think I remember early on in the season, I heard something about a potential 8-year extension. Like, I don't think it was any specific rumor. I think it was just someone it was one of the main media pundits speculating, just saying, I think that this is something that both sides would be interested in. Not sure if I see that now. I'm not sure if I see them wanting to give Bunting an 8-year contract. So if he's looking for security, not 100% sure that he'd find that in Toronto, but we'll have to see.
Yeah, and the main thing, whether it's with the Maple Leafs or anywhere else, it is going to be that reputation, especially in the second half of that season, because there have been times where he has been upset about a penalty on him or a missed penalty on him, and he's very, very vocal. I mean, we've heard it on the broadcast, him yelling at the top of his lungs, where he's gotten into that reputation where he's going to complain about every little thing. And in the playoffs, there have been times where there's supposed to be a penalty call on him, and there isn't. And then there was one time where maybe it was a penalty, and then it boils over to, like, even during the regular season, where he gets a penalty or he draws a penalty and then he gets one himself for either embellishment or misconduct, what have you. It seemed the refs did have it out for him. That was a given. Elliot Friedman mentioned that even on one of the broadcasts. I believe it was that game against the Detroit Red Wings where this whole entire thing started. But yeah, that's going to follow him no matter where he goes, because the refs are going to take note whether he's in a Maple Leaf jersey or anywhere else. I think that obviously he plays with that chip, he plays with that intensity and the agitating style. That's great, but you're going to have to know when to walk away. And instead of yelling at the officials, maybe just having a polite conversation, despite the officials, being inconsistent, express your show your or state your opinion and express like what happened, but don't do it in a way that'll just come off as being annoying or something like that. And I think that's where he really needs to kind of tone it down a bit in terms of just his emotion. And it has gotten the best of him at times, given that suspension, but we'll see what happens, because I really do think that he has what they need. He just can't stray away from that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. In the end, I think that the bottom line is that if he's going to come back, it has to fit in with the team's plans, and it has to fit in a sense that it makes sense for them. So overall, I think all that matters is the success of the team going forward. And Dubas alluded to that in the press conference today. He said, anything's on the table as long as it helps bring a cup to Toronto. So
absolutely. And I'm going to give this as 2 rapid fire questions. Question number 1, Calgary, apparently there was rumor, I believe it was Frank Saravalli, that the Flames are trying to talk to assistant general manager Brandon Pridham. And we all know how well he manages the cap with everything salary-wise. Just your overall opinion, how tough would that be if the Maple Leafs let Pridham walk, considering that he is an important part to their organization, but they don't want him to stay here forever. I mean, at some point he's going to move on to bigger and better things.
Yeah, hopefully that he wants to stay in Toronto, because I think he's a big part of that front office. But I mean, yeah, you can't fault the guy if he gets general manager opportunity. So, I'm going to selfishly hope that he stays, but all the power to him if he finds a better opportunity.
Absolutely. And I'm going to selfishly agree with you there. Stay away from our cap guru and find your own cap guru. No offense, Calgary. But then again, you're going to be happy for him no matter what, because he has done great things. Second rapid fire question. Who is one player that you definitely want to see back on the Maple Leafs next year? Let's move away from the core four and the star players. It could be a player that was acquired, that was signed in the offseason, or maybe even someone that you would like to see the Maple Leafs try and go after.
At a discount, I'm going to say Ryan O'Reilly, because he's a guy that I think would be worried. Or I think he'd be worrisome if the Leafs were to sign him to a contract that's that might be expensive and might age poorly given his status and how old he is. He's obviously not that old, but giving a long-term contract to a guy in his early 30s has proven to be a bit of a dangerous path in the past. So if they can get him for a relatively cheap dollar, I really hope Ryan O'Reilly, because I think he made a big contribution this year after the deadline. And I also just think that he's a big part of the forward group, and even now not having him in there makes it look kind of bare. So you hope that he's a guy that can come back for potentially a hometown discount, but we'll see.
Absolutely. I'm going to do a 2-for-1, and I'm going to say Luke Schenn, the human racer, and Noel Acciari. Both Acciari said that he would love to stay in Toronto too. I know that as soon as I saw that comment, I'm like, me too, Noel. I would love to see him sign, because of the fact that both him and Schenn can lay the body, and that is going to be huge. And if they're able to sign at sort of like a cheap contract, Acciari maybe 1.52 million, Schenn maybe just under $1 million of what he's currently making. Let me double check to see what he's currently making. But if they're able to fit both of them into a reasonably cheap contract situation, I think it's going to be huge. Acciari's 1.25 and Schenn is $850,000. So I think with that kind of money, you can probably re-sign them to that current value, because they know what their role is going to be. They know they're not going to be the stars. They're going to be the energy type of players. And I think that they would still benefit for a full season with the Maple Leafs and try and, come back and finish the job that wasn't done this time around.
I agree. And I would love to see both of those players back,
especially from game 1 to 82 and beyond. That'll just be absolutely amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that just about does it for this episode of the Maple Leafs Lounge. Once again, thank you for tuning in. For Alex Hobson, I'm Peter Baracchini. We will see you next time on the Maple Leafs Lounge.